I changed my major 3 times before
really?
I landed on history.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, I took 21 credits, like 2.5 semesters straight, just to get a degree in history. I've never used my degree for anything practical in the real world. No.
Yeah, I hear you.
What am I gonna do? Work at a library or a museum or something? Like.
Welcome to How I Embraced the Suck, a podcast where you get to hear from veterans what life in the military is really like. I am your host, Walt, and before we start, you should know that I do not censor the show in any way. You have been warned. All right, so here we are with Danny. How's it going?
Good, man. How you doing?
Yeah, great. Glad you hosted me for this, and glad you could be on the podcast.
Glad you could be here too, brother. I'm glad you made the trip. It's a little bit of a hike up from your neck of the woods, but yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So give me kind of an overview of your time in the military, your getting in, time in, getting out, etc.
Yeah, so I think I decided subconsciously to join the military when I was in 5th grade, 9/11. You know, like a lot of people, I think it lit a fire in a lot of folks. I was obviously young and naive and didn't have a firm grasp on the reality of the world. But I had that, patriotism, rah-rah fire that was lit pretty young. I'm one of 5 boys, so I'm the second oldest of 5 boys, and we were all in high school at the same time, so all very close in age.
Oh, yeah.
There's twins in there.
Yep.
So just always a very competitive, rambunctious, violent household, despite
not a low T household.
No, definitely not. Despite my parents being like super, super Catholic. One of my brothers is actually a priest. That's how Catholic my family is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, my older brother enlisted in the Marine Corps in his junior year of high school. So he joined the poolee program where you sign up before you're eligible or old enough to go to boot camp. And, you start going to weekly workouts and go to the local recruiter's office and get some PT, maybe some close order drill in, but it's just about prepping you for boot camp a little bit. So I started going with him to those when I was a sophomore in high school. And I knew I wanted to join the Marines because, if he's doing it, I'm not going to do something easier. I'm going to do the hardest fucking thing because I can. So yeah, that kind of put me on that path. And then I took the ASVAB my junior year and started being pushed toward the officer route because I scored really well on that. And at that point, it would have been 2008. I was in the position where I had to decide between like going to war because the war in Afghanistan and Iraq was sort of starting to wind down at that point, or go the officer route, get college paid for, spend 4 years in university while I'm doing all the officer training, and then get out to the fleet, in 2013 and basically miss the war. So that was a tough decision for me. I think my parents had a lot of influence in helping me choose the officer route, go to college first, do all the training, and it all worked out really well. And I don't regret my decision now. I regretted it for a long time, but anyway, I applied for a 4-year scholarship for the Reserve Officer Training Corps for the Marine Corps and got it. So it was like a $200,000 scholarship. So I didn't pay for college. I didn't pay for housing.
Wow.
Went to a Catholic university and lost my Catholicism there. But that's a whole nother story. But yeah, went through the officer training program in college, was commissioned in 2013, and went active duty as a Marine officer. So you do a bunch of training. I don't know how deep you want to get into like that sort of time in my life, but there's a 6-month training period for all Marine officers. Once you're commissioned, you go to something called the basic school. TBS is what we call it. It's in Quantico, Virginia. And it's a 6-month period where you are taught essentially how to be a platoon commander. So if you're, commanding a 30 Marine unit in some sort of field environment, it was about half field work, half classroom. So you're just constantly taking tests and you're out in the field leading, assault exercises and setting up defensive positions and simulating battle. And at the time, it was annoying and not fun.
Right.
But then, afterwards, once you get out to the fleet and your real job starts, you look back on it pretty fondly.
Right.
Some of the guys that were in my fire team, my squad back then, like were still pretty close.
Sure.
It was a pretty cool experience. From the get-go, like when I went to enlist in high school, all the way up through like toward the end of TBS, so we're talking like a 6-year period, I was pretty gung-ho on being infantry. Like I wanted to be a ground pounder. Yep. I wanted to, be the tip of the spear kind of thing.
No pogue life for you.
No. Well, then I ended up being a pogue. So it all kind of came full circle to that. There was a lot of pressure from, guys in my platoon at TBS that were like, dude, if you're capable of it, you have a responsibility to do it. Because there's, there are a lot of guys that want to be an infantry officer, but they're just not everyone that joins the military is the nation's finest. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So they were trying to make me feel like I had a duty to do it. And that's a fun sentence. And I kind of had a point where I was like, maybe I don't want to do this for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And if I don't, what am I going to be ready for? Like what sort of job am I going to fall into after 4 or 8 years of being an infantry officer? Like what skills translate where I can make a case for someone to hire me for good money? So I'd started caring about investing in money at that point, and I was ready to set up my future. So I just had a kind of soul-searching heart-to-heart with myself and decided to be a pogue and find another MOS, or mission occupation specialty, a job that would set me up better for the future.
Right.
I felt like a pussy when I did it.
Oh yeah.
Because that's kind of the indoctrination. That's how you're trained. Like if you're not an infantry guy, you're full of shit. Like you're not a real Marine, you know?
Right.
But I ended up going aviation maintenance officer. So I was managing maintenance departments of anywhere from 100 to 250 Marines for light attack helicopters. And then the last couple of years was drones. So it was a whirlwind, crazy experience. Did a couple of quote unquote deployments to the Northern Territories of Australia. A couple smaller detachments to various areas in the South Pacific.
Okay.
But it was mostly training exercises. So never got shot at, nothing like that. I was a pogue through and through. I was managing our Marines that were ensuring we had the aircraft to support the ground forces and to meet our daily, weekly, quarterly, annual mission requirements. So, and it was a great experience in prepping me for pretty much any sort of corporate job, getting out of the military. A lot of organizational skills, a lot of visibility. Okay. I was answering to lieutenant colonels and colonels like right away as a second lieutenant, having to report to them on the readiness of our 26 aircraft.
Okay, sure.
Right out of the gate. And I'm this little second lieutenant who's used to talking to like captains. And all of a sudden I'm in front of this crusty old guy who's just judging me, Yeah,
and
I'm
of course.
Aircraft 26 is down because of a busted servo. And they're like, well, why didn't you order a new one? Well, I did, sir, but it's back order. He's like, well, did you order the right part number? I'm like, I don't fucking know because I'm a second lieutenant. I don't know anything. There was a lot of that for a couple of years before I was comfortable in my job.
Right. Yeah.
It was a fun experience. Got me comfortable in the spotlight, though. So if someone's going to call me out or, if I'm talking to the CEO of a company, like I sold to a lot of C-suite folks afterwards, got me very comfortable just sort of being under that scrutinous gaze of someone who's supposedly far above my station. But yeah, it sucked in the moment. But it was a very, very productive experience for me, setting me up for the rest of my life. So.
Sure. Yeah. So, excuse me, the poolee program, is that kind of like ROTC for enlisted vaguely?
Not so much. ROTC is more about, I'm not sure what ROTC in high school is like. I never did any of that stuff, but in college, ROTC kind of becomes like, say you're in a varsity sport and they're dictating a lot of your day. So you're waking up at 4:30 and you're going to physical training or drill every morning, and then you're going to class all day, and then you have ROTC garbage you have to do in the afternoons. Whether it's we had something that was called Semper Fi Society, where you'd be teaching land navigation tactics and going over old war novels or just military tactics. And it was a large chunk of your day that was given over to this program, which is fair because it was for a lot of us a full ride scholarship.
Right.
So you know, you gotta earn it, and it's all about prepping you to be a good officer. Whereas the poolee function in high school, it's really just, okay, this kid wants to sign on the dotted line. He wants to enlist and go to boot camp, but he hasn't graduated high school yet, or she hasn't graduated high school yet, or he's just not old enough yet. So you go into the poolee function and you show up to the recruiter's office once a week and do PT. Basically, you do like a physical fitness test or maybe some other kind of workout with the recruiter and with the other poolies that are signed up. And it's just all about prepping you, mostly physically, tiny bit mentally for boot camp.
Okay.
Which is, you know, boot camp is a whole nother. I didn't go through enlisted boot camp.
Right.
I have a lot of friends who did, though. And I went through the officer version, which is officer candidate school. And, you know, if you're joining the Marine Corps, or generally from some of my other friends, from any other branch, as long as you're in shape, and as long as you're not trying to make a target of yourself or like be in the limelight, you're going to be fine.
Sure.
You know, it's not that hard. It's going to suck for 13 weeks, but if you just shut the fuck up and do what you're told for 13 weeks, you're going to pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's going to be fine.
Try to not be noticed.
Exactly. So the poolee program was just about prepping you mostly physically for that, getting you in shape so you could get your, you know, at least 15 pull-ups and score pretty well.
Right.
So there were a good number of, we called them fat bodies, who wanted to join, but they couldn't pass the minimum requirements. So, yeah.
So if a kid, you know, an 18-year-old or something came up to you and said, "Hey, you were in the military, super cool, I want to join," what would your advice be to them?
Yeah. Number one is that the military can be a really, really great route that sets you up well for the rest of your life, for sure. I like to think I'm a good example of that. Like, I've done pretty well. Coming out as a captain, you know, at age 27, as an 03, the third of the officer ranks, with no debt. I used my experience and my government-paid education to position myself for a very well-paid job in corporate software sales.
Sure.
And I've been able to position myself for the kind of life that I want to live. So it can absolutely work for a lot of people. And if you enlist as well, if you go the enlisted route, you still get the GI Bill, so they pay for your education. I would, as a caveat to that, though, just say you need to make sure your reasons for joining are sound.
Okay.
That they're good reasons. If it's like 90% rah-rah patriotism related, I don't know, go read shit like War is a Racket by Smedley Butler, the legendary Marine Corps general. Just talking about the economic benefit of warfare, and, you know, try to really get a handle on how does the military-industrial complex truly work? Because you don't want to go in blind with this perception that America is the greatest country in the world. It may be debated in some ways.
Sure.
But if you go in just thinking like, I need to serve my country, I need to be a hero, I want to do this, I want to do that, I mean, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Okay. Yeah,
at some
so
point.
your motivation could evaporate once you hit the wall of reality.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there is that. I guess number two, the other thing I would say is that if you're going to join the Air Force. You know, best quality of life, you got the best gear, best chow, benefits, best in general, best, you know, post-service career relatability, just being able to translate your skills. You're going to hate your life a lot less if you join the Air Force. I'm sure their requirements, you know, their eligibility requirements are a little more stringent than they used to be.
Okay.
Like when I enlisted, or when I went to enlist in 2008, it wasn't hard, man. They were taking anyone with a pulse that could, you know, do a few pull-ups. Whereas nowadays, peacetime military, little higher requirements, which is little backwards in my opinion. But anyway, join the Air Force. If you're going to join the military, just if it's all about trying to be or be perceived as a badass, you're a fucking idiot. Like, don't waste your time. Like, being a Marine isn't going to make you a badass. You know, it'll probably make you a little more arrogant. It'll make it a little less likely that people want to be around you.
Yes.
It'll give you an excuse to be the same dipshit you are now.
Right. But because of the uniform, it
exactly
allows it.
It's a free pass, essentially. It's expected that you're a hard-headed asshole.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But
gotta match the brand.
if you want to challenge yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, in a lot of ways, then Marine Corps can be the right route for sure. It's just you're going to deal with a lot more bullshit, a lot more indoctrination, a lot more institutionalized kind of tradition. And
sure,
if that's your thing, cool, like go for it. But yeah, I mean, I'm proud to be a Marine in some ways, in other ways, not so much. But if I were to do it again, Air Force would have made the last 10 years of my life a little more enjoyable.
Sure.
I would say, for sure.
Less sleeping in the mud. And
which I was,
a little more AC.
I was fine with that part. Honestly, I like the austere stuff, but there's just a lot of inefficiencies when you're a department of the Navy, and the budget reflects that. You know, when you're trying to get parts for your aircraft to keep them from falling out of the sky, so that your pilots can keep their quals. And that's the only reason you're fucking flying. But the airframes themselves are, 20, 30 years old, and you're having mishaps every month and people are dying. You start to reflect on, okay, what the fuck are we doing? Like what are we doing here?
I hadn't considered that the need to stay qualified as a pilot is even separate from your missions.
It's pretty much what our mission requirements are built off of when we're in peacetime.
Okay.
Like most of the time when I was stationed in Hawaii, that's how they built the daily flight schedule. It was okay, well, guys need to, stay up on which quals, and okay, we need to fly 2 sorties to make sure these guys get, their night rating again and all this other garbage. And you're sitting there with like 4 planes that are actually flyable, that are safe for flight. The rest of them are like partially mission capable PMC or just down.
Sure.
And you're like, great, we're going to fly all 4 of them and break 2 of them. And then tomorrow we're going to be fucked. And that was pretty much every day for like 4 years.
Sure. Wow.
So
you were handling all that. You were responsible for, I think you mentioned helicopters and then also drones, but a whole squadron or more than, what were you over?
Maintenance department.
An entire squadron?
So an entire squadron, the maintenance department. So the drones came later. That was a separate squadron.
Okay.
Typically how it works in my specific MOS, my job of aviation maintenance officer, is you will do 1 tour as the maintenance officer for a flying squadron on the flight line. So that's, for me, it was light attack helicopters. Maybe it's CH-53s, shitters as we call them. The slightly larger helicopters that leak hide oil all over, so we call them shitters, or the Ospreys, the V-22s. And then after doing 2 years of that, of just the worst part of our career progression, because you're putting out fires every day, and you're answering to multiple colonels, like not just yours, but also there's what's called a MALS, Marine Air Logistics Squadron.
Okay,
that's sort of across the street or somewhere on base near you, but their whole purpose in life is to support the flight lines. But they report up to the MAG, to the general, and you're responsible for reporting in both to your CO to ensure your mission requirements as a squadron are being met, that you have enough aircraft to fly those missions, but then also you're reporting up through the colonel over at the MAG, and the MALs, because they have to report up their chain of command to tell the general, like, hey, here's, where we're at for aircraft readiness and, the supply system and parts availability. And so sometimes those 2 things can conflict, those 2 chains of command. So choosing between that as a young second lieutenant who's still trying to figure out his job, that's always fun. But yeah, typically you do that job, hating your life, running around like a chicken with your head cut off for 2 years. And then they switch you over to the MALS across the street to that logistics squadron that's supporting the flying squadrons. And that is the cush job. You're chilling. You've got a shop of maybe 30 Marines. Ours was actually mixed Marines and sailors.
Okay.
Navy and Marines. So it was even more chill because it broke that like strict Marine Corps kind of environment. So I was really looking forward to that after 2 years of light attack helicopter shit. which is kind of notoriously one of the crappier assignments because there's 2 type model series, Yankees and Cobras. So you're dealing with 2 different aircraft with different parts availability and, different mission requirements and mission capabilities. This is a little more complex.
Sure.
But, I came back from my second deployment in Australia with the helicopters, and I was supposed to report over to the MALS, the logistics squadron, the nice cushy job. And the major over there was like, "Don't unpack. You're going across the street to the drone squadron." They just failed their inspection. It's a wing inspection. They come by and make sure all of your programs are on track and you're doing everything properly.
Right.
So we need you to go over there and overhaul their maintenance programs. So
great.
I went, out of the kettle into the frying pan or whatever.
Yeah.
So my entire fleet experience was at flying squadrons. I never got that break. I got out as a captain and I left the drone squadron and went to the civilian world. So maybe I would have stayed in if I got a taste of that cush life. But honestly, probably not at that point. I was a little jaded, a little over it, and I had met my now wife at that time, and I didn't want to.
You had other goals.
Yeah, man, I didn't want to leave her for 6 months because both of my deployments were drop of a hat. You have 3 days to pack or to get out of your apartment lease, and then you're leaving for 6 months. And because I was filling in for someone that couldn't make it both times.
Gotcha.
So I didn't have much. I was like, I'm not going to go through this again if I have a wife or, a fiance or whatever, and, eventually kids. So I knew that as soon as my time in Hawaii was up, that they were going to probably send me to the East Coast on some bullshit B-billet is what it's called. You go do something that's not related to your specific job, like recruiter or maybe the captain at an ROTC at a university or whatever. I was like, I don't want to do any of that shit. So I'm just gonna get out, try my hand at the civilian world, see what happens. And it's worked out pretty well. But like I said, that experience, as much as I liked to gripe in the moment about it, it taught me a lot. I wasn't a super organized person beforehand.
Okay.
I was, I don't want to say naturally intelligent, but like tests were always easy for me. I did really well in high school without studying, did pretty well in college without studying. But that experience was a slap in the face that like, you can't just get by without being prepared for shit.
Right.
You're going to have to figure out how to get organized, if you're answering to a bunch of sort of higher up folks on a daily basis, you need to know things like inside and out, as well as all your enlisted Marines do. Not necessarily like how to fix the aircraft, because that's not my job. I'm a pogue and also not a mechanic.
Right.
I'm not fucking, I warmed a desk and ran reports and Excel spreadsheets, and it was nonstop, that kind of admin shit. But it prepared me really well for the corporate world, because that's all a sales job is, really. It's being organized, it's talking to the right people, it's being prepared.
Sure.
And if you can figure out how to be prepared, whether you're talking about your job, your career, your family life, being ready for shit to go down. I'm not a prepper or anything, but just, I think everyone has a personal responsibility to just be ready for whatever, not talking just catastrophe. If there's a hurricane or if it's, you lose your job, what are you going to do? Do you have an emergency fund set up?
Right.
That job got me sort of thinking that way about everything. And I started focusing more on being prepared, which, has worked out really well for me. Yeah,
that's...
Sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there. But.
No. That for sure. I mean, that's a good viewpoint. Probably not everybody. Some people in the military, they're all organized, and then they get out, and it was the external structure that gave them that, and they just become lazy or slobs or whatever. So seeing that, how you took it and then built off of it, you used it to improve your life. I think that's good to hear. So that kind of answers, to a certain extent, answers the question. But how would you say the military affected your outlook on life in general? Your time in the military, I guess like that did answer a lot of that.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple other moments
Facets.
I can touch on maybe. Like I said, I was a pogue. No one was shooting at me. I didn't have any crazy combat experiences that changed my outlook. Had a lot of friends die from aircraft mishaps. So
on the line or out flying?
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, when you're flying old ass equipment and your supply system's shot, and you're the one that is dealing with those supply constraints and trying to get the birds up, and then aircraft are flying out of the sky almost, it seemed like, on a monthly basis for a while there. Losing 22 guys, anywhere from close friends to just acquaintances, guys I deployed with or whatever. That affects your outlook pretty early on, because it gets you kind of pissed off. You know?
For sure.
Because then it's visceral and it's real. It's like, okay, people are dying and we're just doing training exercises. These guys aren't getting shot out of the sky. These are just either mechanical malfunctions. A lot of the times weather's involved. Maybe someone made the wrong call to actually fly that mission when the conditions probably, you shouldn't be out in that kind of shit.
Right.
So you start to question a lot of things about what is it we're doing here? What's the real value? What's the ROI? And why are people dying regularly? So that hits you. That's pretty impactful from early on. And that was probably had some influence in my decision to get out. So that definitely, you asked what impacted my outlook. It helps you understand that life is short and precious, and you should enjoy it, every moment of it while you can, with the people you love. I've always kind of embraced that ever since, I started losing people. So, the other thing is probably the responsibility piece that I mentioned, from talking age 24 as a brand new officer, second lieutenant, doesn't know shit. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of training, but it doesn't prepare you for your actual job. It's mostly OJT, on the job training. So answering to those people, like you said, I already hit on it, but getting me comfortable being uncomfortable in professional situations.
And still pushing through it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the other thing that I really liked about the military, I guess, structure of how our chain of commands worked and how our different assignments worked was that I got to work under a lot of different people. From, like, I had a few different majors over me in the squadron life, in that environment, while I was at that one squadron. Like, they would cycle in and out because it was sort of a temporary assignment for them.
Sure.
So I got that. I also had leadership over at the MALs, the colonels that I would report to, the majors over there. So I got to see a lot of different styles of leadership, styles of management. Yeah. How these guys decided to lead and to influence and to, get shit done. So that was a really, really great experience for a young, 24-year-old who was a brand new officer. I got to say, like, I like how this guy does this. I like how he takes care of his guys. Really don't like how this guy does X, Y, Z. Yeah. And I could just kind of try on different hats and take or discard things from different people and kind of build up my own idea of, what does it mean to be a leader and to be a manager. So that was great. I mean, super valuable for a young sort of supple mind that was ready to grow.
So since you got out, have you stayed in touch with any of the command that you were under? Have you ran across them in civilian life or in your civilian life?
There's one guy, the CEO, the lieutenant colonel I worked for at the drone squadron. He went on to write a book, actually. There was a book by, I think, Lieutenant Colonel Lex Grossman? Lieutenant Colonel Grossman wrote a book called On Killing. Yeah. Maybe 20 years ago. I think it was a while back. I actually wrote my senior history thesis on, most of the information from my thesis came from his book. But my former CO, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne Phelps, he wrote a book called On Killing Remotely with Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. So they did a collab, and he authored this book, and it just came out
because of his experience with drones and stuff.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, I've kind of kept in touch with him a little bit. Not a hell of a lot, but all the other guys, most of them stayed in. He got out and started writing. He's done really well with that. Really happy to see the success he's been having. But yeah, the other guys, not Not really. They've been pretty busy. A lot of deployments, a lot of their own thing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to how the dynamic changes when you're a captain or whatever reporting, and then you come to them and you got a beard and long hair, and they're still in. That's kind of that. The way it would adjust. There's still that respect, obviously.
Yeah,
but not the commitment.
Sure.
To be under.
Yeah, there's definitely the respect piece, but I respect people. I don't care if you were a lieutenant colonel or if you were a lance corporal. I'm going to talk to you like a person, and that's how I've always decided to do things, even when I was in. So I think, I don't want to say I had a cheat code or anything, but I feel like I connected with a lot of the higher level officers.
Okay.
Because it was a frequency thing. I was always in their office reporting on our mission capabilities, our aircraft readiness. So from early on, I was able to just straddle that line of being respectful, but also just kind of developing relationships with them.
Okay.
But there's also the military, you mentioned if we stay in touch, it's like there's the military aspect of, there's guys I went through training with, 8 years ago, I could call up and we could hang out or like plan a trip or something.
Right.
We haven't spoken in years, So
but
there's
because of that common bond.
Yeah, there's that element too.
Huh.
So.
Yeah, that's one thing, even a lot of people that when they're going in, they say the camaraderie of it really, really grabs them. And I can see that, the shared hardship. And then having gone through that, as you say, even 8 years later or whatever, you can call back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't want to say I was like unique or an enigma or anything, but I didn't really hang out with a lot of the guys I worked with outside of work.
Sure.
When we were deployed, obviously, like, you're with them the whole time, but like, especially once I met my wife in Hawaii, like we had our own little tribe out there.
Right.
And I would, as soon as I was done with work, I would disassociate and just go be with them and not be that military person. So it was kind of a light switch for me. Mm-hmm. The camaraderie at work, that was cool. But I was also able to find that sort of, not as strongly once I got out. But I worked remotely for 3 years after I got out of the military. So it's harder to build that kind of office camaraderie when you're working from home.
True.
But I loved it. I loved working from home and just traveling for work and not having to go into an office every day. It saves so much time.
Oh, yeah.
But the camaraderie piece, like, there's still this like subversive sort of idea that, okay, we can have a conversation. I want to get your input. Let's say if you're my staff sergeant or my gunny or whoever I'm working with, but I'm the officer, so I'm going to make the decision. Right. It was always that. So you could only get so close with the enlisted guys. And I tried not to worry too much about like, oh, I'm an officer and, well, fuck that. Like,
right.
I'd rather you call me by my first name, but okay, here's the rules, the sort of boundaries we have to live within.
Sure.
But that a lot of it felt forced and not uncomfortable, but when you're a brand new second lieutenant who, as we like to say, doesn't know shit about fuck, that's how we put it. Like, nothing. And you're leaning on your staff sergeants, your gunnies, and your master guns or your master sergeants for pretty much everything on a daily basis.
And they know that. And they know that.
Yeah, man. For like over a year, you're like, I'm not capable of making decisions by myself. I need lots of input. So coming into that, that's always an interesting dynamic as a young officer.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out the balance between like, okay, I need to be in charge. I need to make decisions that are good for the squadron, keep the big picture in mind, treat my guys well, not piss off the wrong people, but defend my people and not cross certain professional lines at the same time.
Sure.
Especially when you're deployed, everybody's drinking together when you can.
Yep.
Especially, if you're in Australia. I say deployment in quotes because like if you're not down in the desert, you're up in Darwin, the northernmost city in Australia, and then you can, hit up the bars, once or twice a month kind of thing. So it's really easy to slip past those lines when you see your Marines out partying and whatnot. But I don't know, man, there's just like an unspoken, if everybody can keep it together and when you're at work, you're professional and you're not crossing any crazy, there are certain things that are not allowed per the UCMJ, but I don't know. It's not too hard to straddle that. It's just the uppity fucking people that want to play by the book and that had no friends growing up that want to like get on you for like, hey, you're not supposed to be, drinking with them, or like having like, man, why don't you fuck off and mind your business?
Right.
Like, these are my Marines.
Right. So
whatever. So anyway, another segue. I don't even remember what you initially asked me about.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Excuse me. The personal aspect of the background and everything, that's really insightful, because it's not just a history book. It's not just this dry experience, but to hear you lived it, you saw it. It gives it a lot more meaning, I think, and obviously a lot more interest.
Yeah.
To hear that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of perceptions out there about military members and veterans just being, robots, killing machines, that kind of thing.
Sure.
It's like, man, it's for the vast majority of people, it's just another job. Maybe you join for your own reasons, sure, but like really, you're going to work every day. You're bitching about things in the smoke pit. You're doing your job and trying to have a good time when you can. Like pretty much any other job in the world. Like you're just trying not to hate your life. And yeah, it can be a very, it can be a cynical environment. That's probably something I could have mentioned on the life outlook question.
Right.
I've always been kind of outwardly social, and not political, but like I get along with everyone for the most part. Yeah. But the Marine Corps kind of gave me an excuse to lean into my underlying cynicism. I've always been like a more realist, cynical person down deep. And the Marine Corps is just like, if you lean into it, it'll welcome you with open arms, because it's an incredibly salty branch of the military.
For sure.
Everyone's pissed off all the time. There are exceptions. There are those few guys that are just like beacons of hope when you go in to your barracks or squadron office or whatever, and they're always smiling and cracking jokes. And it's like, okay, this environment functions because of those few people that someone cracks a joke, and it's like you could be in the worst situation on earth, but you're going through it together. So then it turns into a funny moment that you look back on with sort of a positive light.
Yeah, I've thought it'd be cool, or it'd be cool to see a war movie, and they're in the middle of a firefight, and then all of a sudden one of the guys, he just like, oh, I lost the game, and he's in the middle of a firefight, but he's relaxed enough to just make a cultural reference, and in the movie, it might not happen in real life. But
I feel
in the
like
movie, that'd
Generation
be pretty cool.
Kill probably has a few moments like that.
Yeah.
If I think back.
Yeah, and actually I was going to mention partly that, your view on that, and then also the book by Nathaniel Fick, the
One Bullet Away.
there. Yeah, One Bullet Away. Kind of what, obviously you weren't in combat, but being in the Marines especially, what is your kind of viewpoint on that, the realism, and then also just I guess mostly the realism of it. What did you think about that?
Yeah, so Generation Kill, I think it's so well received and so loved by the Marine Corps in general, because they kind of got it right, in terms of what a deployed company of Marines is going to act like.
Sure.
Just the humor and the very, I'm not sure what the right word is. It's extremely vulgar. It's extremely, you're coping with
dark humor all the time.
Dark humor, man, just always. And I love it, man. It's refreshing that they tell a story that isn't just Hollywood's version of, warfare and bullshit.
Right. John Wayne and Rambo.
And, just, carrying the flag as you charge into battle kind of thing. Usually it's been recounted many times, but it's, 99% sheer boredom and 1% terror.
Right.
Or just insanity or chaos.
Sure.
So Generation Kill, I think, does a really great job. One Bullet Away, I read that book when I was either a very, very young officer, like recently commissioned, or like not even an officer yet, when I was still in training. So I was extremely young and naive back then, I think, like all folks in college are. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting a lot of good sort of insight out of it. Obviously, it's been a while since I've read it. But I remember the story that Fick tells and how he sort of built up his platoon, and how he treated his people and how he made sure they were ready in the event of, his passing, or if he was ready in the event of his boss, getting shot. That's the whole concept of one bullet away. Like, you're one bullet away from being, like, from your staff sergeant taking over, or you taking over a company. So it was it was a bit of a wake up call, I think, is for me. I romanticized a lot of what I thought the Marine Corps would be. And I think a lot of people do when they're signing the dotted line, or even when, through college. You're in fucking college. You're in that environment. You're going through the officer training, but you still have this perception of what fleet life is going to be like.
Sure.
So you read something like that and you're like, okay, yeah, this is more real. Mm-hmm. I want to say I saw some backlash or something from guys he had maybe served with about some of the stories he told. So that may have soured the book a little bit, but I do remember getting a lot of really good insight as a young officer from that. So yeah, I think I would still probably recommend it. I need to reread it. It's about time for that.
Yeah, between the two books, Generation Kill and One Bullet Away, I appreciated the insight into the interaction between, as you were talking about earlier, between officer and enlisted, and then that there's kind of a dichotomy, but also it is mutually supportive relationship, but there's also a mutual aggression or distrust, I guess.
Yes.
So most of the experience I have with military veterans is enlisted. So obviously hearing it's really easy to agree with that viewpoint of officers are terrible, they're all jerks, they hate us, and none of them care about us. But to hear, the reality where that I'm sure there's cases of that, where the officer is, in his mind, is sole importance and his career. But to hear, you, and then also, like you mentioned, Fick, having a genuine desire for their troops, their soldiers or Marines in this case. So do you think that interest decreases as rank grows in your observation, or?
Yeah, I get what you're getting at here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be political or anything, but legitimately, as you get further in rank, do the troops matter less, you think, or is it just you've got so many other responsibilities?
Totally, man. Yeah, it's something I was just talking to my former boss in my sales life. My former boss was an Army Ranger officer. We just had this conversation about how sales and military life relates in terms of, as you progress in rank, you lose sight of what it's like to be the little guy very quickly. Okay. He promoted up from sales executive to sales director. So then he had people over him. And within weeks, he felt himself losing, I forgot how hard it was to do these things I'm asking these guys to do, that I'm like, just fucking do it, because we need to hit, you're thinking of the bigger picture.
Right.
So absolutely, that's a real thing. It's a real psychological phenomenon, I think. As soon as you promote up, you instantly are only thinking about, okay, this new role, I'm forced to look at the bigger picture. I'm forced to look at some larger, it would be KPIs in the business world, or just, mission requirements in the military world. And you don't really have a choice, So I think the guys that can actually reroute themselves on a regular basis back down to have the EQ, the empathy to say, how does this affect my guys and gals when I make this decision?
Kind of see it through their eyes.
Yeah, it's totally real. Yeah, and it's a very good question, because it's not just military either. My former boss and I started talking about it because it was happening with one of our VPs in the civilian world.
Sure.
And that guy wasn't military or anything, but you can be the star sales executive and work your way up in the company, and then you're an asshole because you don't know how to lead people.
What's the saying? You get promoted to your level of is it inefficiency?
Yeah.
Or something? You get promoted to your failure point, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about that when you were talking about your normal progression would have been 2 years on the flight line, and then moving to MLG, something like that.
The MALs. Yep.
There we go. The value to that, I don't know if it was intended or not, that I can see is once you're in Mal's, you've been there. Like, you know the day-to-day grind.
1,000%.
You're enjoying the posh office, but also, to a certain extent, you can relate back.
Yes.
Like, you probably lose that, as you're saying. You lose that quickly.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. I mean, most people in the squadron or, just there on base don't understand that dynamic, like why they have people cycle around. So you hit the nail on the head.
Sure.
That's exactly why. Because, if you're at the logistics squadron, the MALs, and there's some sort of order request for a part, like the MALs had, I don't want to get too far into it, but there's S-level shops or S-level squadrons or flying squadrons, and there's the I-level where they can fabricate things that you can't necessarily do on the flight line.
Okay.
They have, milling shops and shit where they can, fix things you couldn't do in a flying squadron. You're supporting those guys for whatever they need. Maybe you have a cache of parts, or you can get something fixed for them, but they're going to submit a request, and typically you look at that request, if you're an enlisted guy over at the MALs, and you say, I'll get to it tomorrow, or like, I have this other workload or whatever. But if you had served like in a squadron, in a flying squadron before, and then exactly like you said, you come over to the I-level, to the MALs, you understand the urgency. You understand that these people need this, like, ASAP is thrown around a lot, every order.
Of course.
It's urgent. I need this ASAP. But, like, you get it. Once you've been over there and you've lived that life for a couple of years, if you come over to the I-level, like, everybody's going to, especially in Hawaii, it's super far from the flagpole. That aloha culture is real.
Yep.
They'll be like, chill out, man. Like, what are you so uptight about? And you're like, no, man, these guys, like, I don't think you understand what they're going through over there.
Right.
So even that, just dissociating from your fellow Marines who are experiencing something else across the street is, it's so easy to forget what life was like before once you move into some new digs,
Huh.
So empathy, man. Life is about empathy.
Yeah. So, you mentioned Generation Kill. You saw the show, right? The HBO.
Been a while.
Okay. So it's been a while. Maybe you won't remember this. Was there a moment in there that as you were watching it, like maybe the whole thing spoke to you, but was there a particular moment you remember that just like you're like, I was there. That was me.
There were. I can't remember. I can't recall a specific line from the movie, but there were multiple instances where the captain, I think they refer to him as Iceman, or no, that's Staff Sergeant.
Encino Man.
Encino Man, yes.
Yeah.
There were a lot of instances of banter between the junior enlisted or the NCOs and the officers and senior enlisted folks that were just like truly towing the line between.
Right.
Insubordination and being funny, but like making a comment about that specific moment. Yeah, that's something else I've been meaning to rewatch. Sidebar, have you heard of Vet TV?
It's been popping up on Facebook. Yeah. And I watch it. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this seems pretty hilarious.
It's legit too. It's a la Generation Kill. They do a very good job in like getting all the dark humor and all of they inject a lot more comedy.
Right.
But they just take some of the most ridiculous situations that probably actually happened that are based on the show runner, the show creators' experiences, and just kind of extrapolate on them and turn them into skits or full shows that last seasons.
Okay.
But there's a couple of them with the deployed group of Marines at some forward operating base deployed that it's just fucking hilarious. It's extreme. It's very extreme. It's dark humor.
Yeah.
But it's if you
but the reality of it is part of what makes it so funny.
It's
maybe
a lot of the Vet TV episodes.
Reality.
They exaggerate it quite a bit.
Sure.
There's scenes where I think he's a first lieutenant at the time, but the platoon commander is like collecting body parts of jihadis, as war trophies and shit. And they make these like comical scenarios. And it's like, dude, okay, maybe there's some sick fucks out there that have actually done that. But it might give civilians an even worse impression of military members and veterans if they watch it. But if you're a vet or a military member, you'll get a real kick out of it.
Sure.
It's like $10 a month or something. So I stopped paying for it, but I enjoyed it for a while.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, so civilian perceptions, part of the impetus for this podcast is the this civilian world, I think something like 3% of the nation is currently serving in the military. And then obviously if you have veterans, it grows. But a lot of the civilian world has little to no contact with real military. They watch movies, which normally is not accurate, or see the news, which is slanted one way or the other usually. What do you, in your experience, what civilian common perception would you say is most accurate? What it's like, oh yeah, you're talking to somebody and they're like, oh well, this happened. You're like, well, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I'm gonna come at it like we've talked about before, but I'm gonna come at it from my specific experience because trying to answer this question is a little hard because I have friends that have different, all across the political spectrum, coming from various backgrounds that all have different opinions on, military members and veterans. So none of it really affects me too much because I don't portray myself as a veteran. Like that's not the first thing I say when I introduce myself to someone. But I think when people find out I was a Marine, a Marine officer, they're like, oh, you must be a hard charger, you know, do what it takes kind of person. And I think that's accurate. Like I'm going to do whatever is necessary to take care of myself and my family.
Sure.
But in terms of like what else is accurate, man, there's just so many things across the board that are, one person will think that Marines are baby killers. And the next will think they're all, Marines are like the epitome of like a true, a war fighter.
Out there with a sword killing dragons.
Clean reputation. And, you have to be super in shape and super smart and, all this. And dude, coming from like the air wing side of things, like not all Marines are crazy in shape. There's some fat bodies out there for sure. Yeah. So a lot of the perceptions are mistaken in that way. Accurate wise, I don't know. I think there's a certain amount of personal discipline you need to have to be a Marine or a Special Forces type guy or military in general.
I like how you just casually blended military, Marines, and Special Forces.
Yeah, right.
Like it's basically the same thing.
It's really not. But I didn't want to say Air Force because it's like, man, any nerd could fucking, which you should. If you're going to join, you should go that route. But yeah, man, I don't know. I think the civilian population gets a lot more wrong than they get right in terms of their perceptions.
Okay, sure.
Like the one that just kind of irks me a little bit is that if you were in the military, that you must have been a ground pounder or you must have been, infantry, you must have been in combat. When in fact, 84% of the military is supporting roles, not combat arms. And the 16% that are combat arms, like nowadays, even a smaller percentage of those guys are actually seeing combat. It's a peacetime military we're in right now. And sadly, I think that some of the most vocal people about being a hard ass, about being a veteran, about, they don't fall into that 16% of combat arms people. Generally, if you were a professional, if you were a warrior, you're not really fucking talking about it, Right. You're going on with your life. Also, being a veteran does not make you a subject matter expert or an authority on international policy or weapons handling or home and personal defense. Fuck, man. A lot of guys like to lean on their experience or their like military background as if that makes them credible when in fact, like, bro, if you were like me, you sat at a fucking desk most of the time.
Yep.
I shot more guns like outside of the military experience than I did like within it. I skipped the range like for 3 years because I was too busy. My boss was like, no, you're not going because we can't lose you for 2 weeks. Right. Because there was always some exercise or some shit going on. So I had waivers for the range. Like
so every Marine rifleman is not necessarily in your experience isn't true.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No. I mean, everybody gets trained, I think, a little better from the get-go. Than the other branches in terms of our standards for physical fitness, for marksmanship. But once you hit the fleet, man, like mission requirements are all that matter. And if you're not an infantry guy, if you're in some kind of supporting role, that's going to take precedence. Sorry, someone's calling me from Georgia. Turn that off. My bad. That's bad etiquette. And especially nowadays, man, I mentioned before, but like the military is not necessarily the nation's finest. You know, like there's a lot of shitheads that join the military too, that kind of get through the cracks. And when that person happens to be an officer, and like you hit on a little bit before, when they're just looking out for their own career, that's when shit gets miserable for the guys underneath them. You know, I've seen a few officers that it's really apparent when they're making decisions that are just for advancing their own career. And those units, those squadrons, those companies tend to have some of the worst morale around, because when there's always that sort of opposing forces or butting heads between enlisted and officers, just naturally, like you mentioned before.
Yeah.
But when you know that someone above you is acting as that shit filter from above, you know, something comes down, but you know, as much shit that you and your captain may, talk, or like he makes you do things because you have to, like it's just part of what's required. You know, he's got your back at the end of the day.
Right.
When that's gone, camaraderie goes out the fucking window. You know, the morale of the unit goes out the window. Like you're not an effective fighting force if your leader is only worried about himself.
Sure.
That does not make a leader. So, and there unfortunately are guys like that out there. So, not sure how we got on that or how I brought us there, but yeah, not everybody's, cut clean, like, that image of, maybe that goes into the civilian perception. If you're a Marine, you're always very well put together and in shape, and
sure,
you act with virtue and justice, and fuck no. No, Marines are notorious for stealing shit.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of our standard operating procedure.
Requisitioning, tactical requisitioning, they call it, or whatever.
Exactly.
You mentioned the friends or acquaintances you lost in flight incidents. I knew a fella, not very close, who committed suicide, and I don't know if you experienced that or knew of it at least. What would you say is the difference in impact on you when it's somebody who maybe even through faulty equipment, kind of an accident, but you could blame it on command or something. There's kind of a different responsibility structure, and then somebody who, for whatever reason, takes their own life.
Yeah, so I don't have any friends that committed suicide from the military. I have a couple that happened from the civilian world.
Okay.
I worked in the bars a little bit when I was in college, and that's an environment that, a lot of drugs and a lot of lifestyle that's not really conducive to good health and habits. But yeah, it's a good question. I've never really thought about the difference in how those things affected me. I think you're totally right that you want to have something or someone to blame. And it was really easy for me to blame the system that we were within when friends are dying from aviation mishaps. But yeah, man, suicide is a whole nother gnarly animal. Even if it's someone you haven't talked to in years, you take on some of that responsibility when that happens. Because you're always going to think, like, could I have done more? Like, could I have called them more regularly? Could I have?
Sure.
There's always that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know where else to go from there.
Yeah, I didn't mean to spring that on you, but
no, yeah, it's a good question though.
Yeah, the friend of mine, like I say, I didn't know him that well. Kind of a more passing acquaintance. But even now, like, I see a picture of him and it hits me. It's like, wow. Yeah, he was in the military too. So I think for a little while it was kind of talked about a lot, the whole 22 a day and everything and all that. But I think the military is kind of, in my experience at least, has kind of stepped away from talking about that. It's not an easy, it's a hard sell. If you're the military and you have a higher suicide rate, it's hard to justify that, I think.
Yeah, so. I think it was we can get into the reason behind why it was happening, but a lot of it is a combination, in my opinion, of, there's the PTSD side of things where you actually went through a lot of shit overseas that affected you emotionally, and you didn't get the help that you needed. Or There's the inability to transition into civilian society efficiently or effectively. And that I took that upon myself for a long time after I got out. For a couple of years, I would have 1 or 2 phone calls a week with veterans that were transitioning out to try to help them, because I feel like I transitioned pretty effectively. I spent about a year on my transition from when I knew I was getting out to actually, getting out and getting a good job. And that was kind of my side mission for a while, was to try to help other military members who were getting out. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have some kind of a purpose, if you don't have, you don't get into a career that you enjoy, or if you feel like you're trapped, or if you're not productive anymore, especially coming from some kind of hyper-productive military environment, you're going to lose a lot of your perceived purpose of living, and that's not going to lend well to the suicide problem. So, yeah, I did that for a while, and now there's so many nonprofits out there to help veterans transition now. I kind of got the feeling like, okay, well, what kind of difference am I really making? I still help whoever I can. Sure. If someone gets referred or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast called Biting the Bullet, which is it used to be 3, but 2 Marines, former Marines as yourself.
Yeah, it's a great podcast.
Yeah. And that is one thing they talk about often, is how their support group when they got out really helped them with that transition. That's not something I really thought about as a civilian. Getting out, you have that whole structure. You have like your whole day is planned out. Everything you do, even after work, often your life is driven by work requirements.
Yep. Yeah, or you're just going right to hanging out with those guys that you were working with all day. You're with the same people, regardless of whether or not you're deployed. They tend to be that's your prescribed friend group.
Right. And then to leave that and just be hit with this liberty, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah.
And lack of direction potentially can be really difficult.
It's also the fact that the military really does kind of coddle you when you're in the sense that, like you said, yes, your day is prescribed. Like you have, where you need to be all day, every day. All the decisions are being made for you. Sure, you have to make decisions at work or whatever, but even things like fucking healthcare. Yeah. I didn't know the first thing about a healthcare plan. Like trying to choose a healthcare plan for the first time was like, what the fuck is I have TRICARE. I don't know what any of this is.
Right.
That's taken care of for you. Like when you deploy, a lot of the admin side, like we have entire support units that are admin units that take care of this shit so that our guys can focus on warfighting or on supporting warfighters.
Sure. Yeah.
So once you get into the real world, a lot of the stuff that was just kind of taken care of for you because you had your mission, now that's gone, and you're trying to find a new job. You're trying to find a new circle of friends potentially, or a new support group.
Sure.
You're trying to figure out all the admin of just being an adult that you essentially deferred for 4 to 20 years. It can be a lot. It can be very overwhelming. And if, like you said, if you don't have that good support group in place, there can be pretty devastating consequences if you're trying to tackle all that alone. So,
yeah. No, I admire that effort that you're saying you make to reach out, because with that, you having experienced it, whatever, even if it's only one person, whatever you can do to remove some of those barriers or smooth out some of those transitions, I think that's admirable.
Yeah, I fell off a little bit. I think I got a little jaded with. I focused a lot on veterans who wanted to get into sales because that was my
vocation,
a logical, so to speak, for transition. A few years, and that was what I did. And sales is one of those things where you don't go to college for it. So if you have a military background, maybe you have a little bit of civilian work experience before or after, like pretty much anyone can make really, really good money in especially software sales. So if a veteran came to me and said, or a military member came to me and said they wanted to get into that, like, how do I go about doing that? I was all about helping them.
Sure.
To the point of where me and a couple of civilian friends put together like a transitioning to sales, like not boot camp, but just some videos and shit. And he used the software that him and his other, I think, co-founder had created for another business. And we put that out there, and then his partner got upset that they had basically used the same shit and they made him take it down.
Sure.
There was a whole process where I got a little jaded because it's like, man, I'm just trying to help and everybody's trying to make it so difficult. I'm not making any money.
Yeah.
But this is adding more stress to my life. And then I just kind of, started taking one-on-one phone calls and then fell off a little bit because I was very unhappy in my corporate sales life once the novelty wore off. Once you get up to the higher like enterprise sales level type shit.
Yep.
And you're dealing with multi-million-dollar quotas, there is a ton of pressure because you're making a lot of money. And if you don't perform, you can get axed. Like if you don't perform for one fiscal year, you lose your job kind of thing. So I think I developed some mild anxiety over the last 3 years. I was able to defer a lot of that shit from the military, stuff that was bothering me. You just push it down.
Sure.
Until this year, actually, it just kind of culminated. And I was like, you know what? I've been doing well enough with investments and I'm making enough money from cash flow from the side that I don't need this fucking job. And it's 98% of my daily stress.
Yeah.
So I quit 2 months ago and haven't looked back.
Yeah.
Really enjoying life right now.
Yeah.
While I can. So a lot of, another segue, but
sure.
Actually starting a land survey services business with our mutual friend Theo later this year.
Sure.
So that's the next business venture.
Yeah, cool.
Should be a good time.
Yeah.
Get the hell out of corporate America and, work for yourself kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. More individual responsibility. Mm-hmm. Not that the military doesn't allow for that. I think it probably breeds it to a certain extent. But I've been struck by the importance of individual responsibility. Anytime you group something or assign something to a group, not always, but often it's just an effort to avoid personal responsibility or individual responsibility. So to jump out like that,
totally agree.
Step out from under the corporate umbrella. Yeah. Take some risk.
Yeah, man. It's like,
get some rewards.
If I'm going to be killing myself or working my fingers down to the bone for something, I want to be doing it for my own business, for my own livelihood. I want to own the equity. Mm-hmm. And I know I can do that because I own equity and other investments, and that works out extremely well. Much more so than, okay, go to your 9-to-5 that you hate, probably work more than 9 to 5, funnel money into a 401k you have no control over, and hopefully retire in 30 years. Mm-hmm. Hopefully. Right. Doesn't work out for a lot of people. Yeah. And they sort of hate their lives in the meantime if they didn't choose the right career path. And they feel trapped. And I was already 3 years into corporate sales, and I knew very easily I could just give myself over to it completely and have a probably not ideal marriage, not be the kind of father I wanted to be. We're expecting now. Mm-hmm. We've had about a year of fighting through infertility and all that. And now we're finally solidly pregnant and overjoyed about that. But that had part of the influence for me, like getting out of corporate America, was I want to be around for my kids, which just isn't a realistic expectation in today's modern society. Sure. The man goes to work and puts bread on the table. Women do it now too. So now our kids are being raised by fucking nannies or daycares or whatever. Right. And I didn't want that life. I wanted to homeschool our kids. I wanted to be present. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to help them learn. I wanted to, help them explore the world. Yeah. And just be there for them and have a hand in how our kids are raised. Sure. I don't want to leave that all on my wife. So getting out of corporate America and kind of doing my own thing was step one. Right. In sort of going down that path. Yeah. So ideal world, Theo and I can set up a homestead and homeschool our kids together and have some arranged marriages or something.
Yeah. So your older brother you mentioned joined. Did any of your other brothers join any branch?
Older brother was enlisted Marine, and then I did Marine officer, and then the twins are a year younger than me. One of them's a doctor, and one of them's a Catholic priest. Oh, okay. And then the youngest was Air Force. Okay. But now
so he took the wise route.
He did, yeah. Actually, he was a crew chief for F-16s.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
And he's now a CEO at a startup in Madison, Wisconsin. So he's doing well. They've all got kids, minus the priest, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. But, does that make for lively family reunions with the two different branches? Or is it more a mutual respect?
I think there was a lot of shit talking earlier on, and now we've just kind of delved into,
You're adults.
or we've settled into Yeah, just talking shit about everything.
Yeah.
It's what 5 boys do when you get together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah, well, that's I appreciate that. That really I think that adds a lot to the picture of different experiences. I don't know if I'll get any super high ranking, but we'll see. Probably not. but yeah, to hear the officer side of things, especially what really means the most or speaks to me the most is that relationship interplay between officer and enlisted, and the struggle, but yet support at the same time.
It's a fun dynamic, man.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with it. Had a lot of really great relationships with some of my guys and others. There's very awkward situations where if there's, especially senior enlisted, if there's a staff sergeant or something who's not performing up to snuff, and you're a second lieutenant trying to write what's called a fit rep, fitness report, where you're doing, quarterly and annual evaluations.
Yep.
And you're scoring them next to all the other staff sergeants that are in the squadron, and
he's got years and years on you, but you've got those butter bars,
some
baby.
guy that's been in 15 years, and you're trying to tell him how to do better, and you're barely fucking. Dude, I was a child, man.
Yeah, you almost don't need to shave every morning,
right? Yeah, yeah. So that was an interesting dynamic to play with, but it forces you to grow up and mature very, very quickly. Even from early college, it's just a bunch of captains and senior enlisted instructors that are telling you look, if you make the wrong decision, people are going to die, and making it very real for you.
Sure.
So that sort of forces you to grow up so that when you do get to the fleet and you have to make those decisions, you can justify your decisions easily because you've put a lot of thought, a lot of preparation, a lot of sort of, I don't even know the right word because you don't have wisdom at that point. You're in your mid-20s, for God's sake. You're an idiot. Right. But you do what needs to be done because you understand why it needs to be done.
Right.
And then you just, you grow up a lot faster.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How I Embraced the Suck. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend. And as my Girl Scout den mother used to say, stay frosty.
I won't talk shit about the Warthog this time.